This is the Deliberate Talks Weekly Podcast, powered by the Pixelated Egg Digital Ventures. Tune in every week to learn something new about digital marketing and entrepreneurship. And now, over to the voice of your host, Dakshin Adyantaya. Enjoy the show.
Hello, and you are listening to the Deliberate Talks podcast, hosted by me, Dakshin Adyantaya. And here I am again on a new Monday to brew a fresh dialogue. And in today's narrative, we have an expert who's going to be discussing all the meat about e-commerce advertising. So quickly, before we get into the groove, here are 3 quick insights about our topic today. Big Commerce claims online stores with social media presence have an average of 32% more sales than those who don't. Shopify highlights the average order value for a customer referred from Instagram is around $65, followed by Facebook at $55, Twitter at $46, and YouTube at $38. Also, online purchasing stats show that the most popular categories a couple of years ago were fashion at 61% and travel at 59%, highlighted by Nielsen. And now more about this with someone who specializes in this professionally. He's an e-commerce expert and an ex-marketing director of divbrands.io. He's also been involved with over 200 e-commerce product launches till date, and is also a Facebook Blueprint certified creative strategist, a CXL certified conversion rate optimizer, and a Klaviyo partner. All the way from Greece, here is George Kapernaros. Hello, George. Welcome to the Deliberate Talks podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Daxton. Thanks for having me.
Superb. Getting straight into our conversation, George. Then to now becoming an e-commerce expert. Let's start with what your journey has been like.
So it's funny because I did not actually start in e-commerce marketing. My first job was in a content marketing role for a company called Smarter Chains, a startup made by ex-Procter & Gamble leaders. Yeah, sounds very far off from e-commerce. But what happened was that I basically did a freelance contract for a company that was in its infancy back then called Div Brands. And what do you know, the contracts we did went really well. They were really profitable. And then obviously they offered me to join full time, which is what I did. I joined as a copywriter. That's how I got into e-commerce. But I started growing into the role. So I became the copywriter, and then I became the marketing manager, and then the marketing director. And the company kept growing and growing and growing. And what's, I think, really interesting about Div Brands is that unlike most e-commerce companies, it grew bootstrapped. There was no venture capitalist funding it. So we managed to grow the company to over 100 employees in less than 3 years. As for me, at my peak, I was responsible for a number of things, including conversion optimization, creatives, and the launch of new stores, because Div had multiple stores in multiple countries. So all in all, just to wrap it up, I was involved in over 200 product launches. But I recently left Div Brands. I started my own company, which people can find at georgekapernaros.com, which is very original. I know it's my name.
You said e-commerce, content, and so many other things that you have been involved with. You know, a lot about your website also reflects the same, and the content revolves around the love for e-commerce marketing, D2C content, conversions, and all those kind of conversations. So I want to start with a direct conversation with you by asking, so tell me how does an effective e-commerce ad structure or a funnel look like?
Yeah, so the way I think about advertising is fairly simple. I'll try to break it down basically. There is the pre-purchase side to the equation. There is the post-purchase side of the equation, right? So when it comes to pre-purchase, what we're looking at is engagement-based targeting. So we have a campaign that's designed to prospect and get new customers into our ecosystem, into our universe in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And based on how they interact with our advertising, we have additional layers of retargeting. So we can bring them back. So for instance, if they saw or engaged with our ad, but did not visit our actual page, then we can retarget them further to bring them to the store. If they did visit the store, that's an additional, more warm layer. And that goes all the way into starting the checkout and essentially retargeting them because they abandoned the cart, almost like you do with emails. Now, on the post-purchase side, the framework I recommend people use because it is kind of intuitive is called RFM, which stands for recency, frequency, and monetary value. What this allows you to do is bucket people, group people into specific buckets.
Mm-hmm.
So you can group them based on how recently they bought.
Right.
So the people that bought over the last 7 days, right? Or the people that buy frequently, people that have bought more than once, more than twice, more than 3 times. Or you can do that by, how much they spend. And then what you can do is retarget those people so that they buy again.
Mm-hmm.
If that made sense.
Right. Absolutely. So that's how the funnel looks like completely. And what about new customers in that case? Constantly getting into new customer acquisition. Is that a part of the funnel, or do you keep remarketing and go for custom lookalike audience?
So the first layer, which let's call it the cold layer, because it brings new people that have not been retouched by all those different touch points,
Right.
is the place where you will bring new people into your ecosystem. But most people won't convert from the first touch point, right? So you will need to re-expose your brand and your products again and again until they complete the purchase, probably.
Right. Makes sense. Okay. Now, also, getting deeper into the platform specific for this kind of approach. When it comes to this side of business, why is there so much of over reliance on particular platforms? Say Facebook and Google have worked great for some brands, but you're so reliant on it that you're not ready to experiment further. What are your thoughts on this approach? And is it a good or a bad acquisition approach?
Regarding the over-reliance on platforms, I think it's because the platforms you mentioned, like Facebook, Google, those platforms have the most eyeballs in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And plus, which is probably the most important factor, they're very accessible. There are, of course, layers of complexity into it. What I just described is somewhat complex and not so easy to just start like that, but everybody can start an ad on Facebook, or everybody can create a campaign on Google, right? It's much easier to advertise on Facebook than to say do a successful content marketing strategy, or I don't know, a direct mail campaign or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's because they have eyeballs and because they're accessible. Now, whether the approach is successful or not, I think is more related to the execution than the channel. There are brands that spend a lot on Google profitably. And there are brands that spend far less and they are losing money, right?
Right.
So I think what makes the approach succeed is ultimately the offer the brand has. So whether there's product market fit, and to a somewhat lesser extent, in my opinion, whether there's brand message market fit. Then, of course, it is all that, more tactical things like who do you target and how does the creative look like, and obviously the economics. You need to have good margins to be profitable. That being said, the downside of being over reliant in one or, I don't know, 2 channels is obviously higher risk. Because what happens if the channel gets more competitive,
right,
or more expensive, or limiting in some other way? If you are only there, then it means you'll get in trouble. We should probably not be married to channels. They're tools to reach people, and they may be here today or they may be not here tomorrow. So it's important to be cognizant of that.
Right. And do you think there's something called as a platform saturation when it comes to e-commerce advertisement?
Absolutely. There are diminishing returns after a certain point, for sure.
Right, right. Okay, if not Facebook, if not Google, if not Instagram, where do I really need to go and look for a new opportunity to explore in terms of an opportunity to grab new customers or target my existing customers in newer platforms? Where do you think the e-commerce marketing is heading towards which platforms?
I'm not so sure about which platforms it's heading, but what I can say with fairly high certainty is that the classic growth at all costs, throw money at Facebook, and write millennial friendly copy and have cool packaging on Instagram and stuff. This model is failing. That's what I know for sure. So there will be some change of sorts. If you take a look at a company like Brandless, they got like 300 million, if I remember well, in funding, and yet they went out of business because they were not profitable essentially. And there are multiple companies like that. Take Outdoor Voices, who is a direct to consumer poster brand. The CEO stepped down due to financial struggles. So the big secret is that the classic model of basically getting investments and then funneling all that money into Facebook and Instagram essentially is not working that well. They are rarely profitable, those brands. Most of them break even or lose money on their first sales. If you think about it, when was the last $1 billion e-commerce brand you saw? It doesn't happen often, right? So I would say that I don't know what channel will be the primary channel or the winning channel of the future, but I think we're shifting towards a more retention first model. Less focus on trying to get as many people as we can and more focus on trying to make the most of the people we have from a monetization perspective.
Right, right. Also understanding from a creative aspect, there's also a part to it when you test these kind of ads content into A/B testing to really understand which really, gets you the best kind of results. So while keeping in mind the creative and copy is an important aspect of advertisement, what is a good e-commerce advertisement creative to achieve new customers, to drive traffic to the website? What do you think are the creative tips or the content tips when it comes to a perfect communication for e-commerce advertisement?
That's an interesting question, which does not have such an easy answer because the real answer is it depends. But as a general guideline, I should say, I think that it's best if you focus on the product when it comes to colder steps of the funnel. So when you are engaging with people that you don't really know so well as a brand, and you want them to get interested in what it is that you're selling, these ads tend to work better when they're product focused, when they're really, really fast, obviously mobile optimized. So I'll go on a tangent, but I think this is important. If you look into storytelling and advertising frameworks, they often say that it's important to have acts. So there is a setup, there is some conflict, and then there is a payoff, right? This is not so applicable in e-commerce advertising because you need to start with a payoff almost. So it needs to be really compressed information. So it's not a traditional narrative that's like a long ad that makes a point. It's point A, point B, point C of what the product is, what it does, and why this, why now. So it's really, really fast information. And it's visual. It's important to state that it's visual. So it's preferably video. When it comes to next steps in the funnel, so warmer ads, it's some interesting types of content and are boxing ads, user-generated content, testimonials possibly, that kind of thing, because the goal there is to increase trust and get social proof. Now, when it comes to the post-purchase side, what I would recommend is that people should not over-abuse discounts and offers and promotions, but it is a good strategy to get additional sales. And if your financials say that it makes sense to offer additional discounts to bring customers again into your store, which obviously depends on what products you're selling and what the economics of the store are, then they should go for it.
Right. Interesting. And, from this approach, also taking it from not just online advertising, but also taking it offline to the stores, driving in traffic also from not just to the website, but to the store from a experience point of view. In that sense, let's understand the hybrid model of this business, in terms of offline and online stores together. How do you
Mm,
optimize this model for the best results? How do you ensure that you have your customer data when it comes to offline model? Because from the online model, you can obviously, with the analytics, you can obviously track your customer data and understand their behavior and everything else. But from the offline point of view, what's a really good consumer data method to have in place and ensure that that can be used effectively for the online advertising as well?
So that's kind of $1 million question. It's a really hard question because hybrid models are hard. Let's take a step back. The D2C model, direct to consumer,
Mm-hmm.
presumably offers better value to the customer because it cuts the middleman in a way, or has a better experience or a better product, or at least that's the premise.
Mm-hmm.
That means that the D2C business usually has bad margins
Mm-hmm.
because A, we want to over deliver on value, and because we obviously, like a new brand, does not have the supply chain and distribution of a legacy company.
Mm-hmm.
The D2C model comes with benefits too, obviously. Like if we have in our listeners women who buy swimsuits, they know that it's a terrible experience to like be in a store and try on a swimsuit. So there are benefits to the D2C model. It's also more practical from a marketing standpoint because, as you mentioned, you get to interact with customers directly, and so you get more data, and therefore you can spend your budget more efficiently.
Right.
So you essentially lose margin, but you get data and you build goodwill. D2C brands start their physical stores. At least some of them try sometimes, but it doesn't take them very far because it's hard to generate enough revenue essentially with just one or two brands or products to cover the cost of an entire store.
Mm-hmm.
That's why so many stores sell multiple brands, because it's more efficient to do it like that. On the other side of the spectrum, traditional companies often try to sell direct to consumer, and they're not really suited for that
Mm-hmm.
because they have incentives to minimize risk. So if you are a huge company, if you are a multi-billion-dollar company, you don't want to try risky things, you want to minimize risks.
Right.
So they can't test the multiple ideas and do all those little experiments that a D2C brand would do. And they don't have the quick feedback loop. That's what actually gives the D2C model the advantage, that they run multiple tests and they get a lot of data. And so they build some know-how that the traditional businesses do not really have. So all that being said, my point is that the traditional model and the D2C model, they have pros and cons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the real opportunity is in bringing the two worlds together in the context of a joint venture.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't really expect a new brand to magically get, 100-year-long distribution network that a legacy company have. And you can't really expect a legacy company to go wild the way D2C brand can afford to.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big opportunity is to bring those two worlds together. D2C brands can contribute, the tactical marketing experiments and learnings they have.
Mm-hmm.
And traditional companies can bring their back end, their infrastructure. And the end result can be the best of both worlds.
Right.
A brand that uses online selling as a learning tool, almost an optimization tool, but maximizes profitability through offline networks that would be otherwise inaccessible. I think this is a conversation that should be happening more often.
Right.
How can we partner up and make e-commerce, rather commerce in general, better?
Right. But when do you think, George, it's a right time to actually diverse your sales channel mix as well as your paid marketing mix? Then in that case, also stitching in from this conversation point of view, how do you diversify this part and where do you focus your budgets on and monies on?
You should be focusing your budgets and money on what gives you the higher return. And that's not only on the front sale. It might be that, I will give a silly example. It might be that, display ads are somehow bringing more customers than, SEO. But if you look deeper, you may find out that the people that buy through SEO through organic traffic or through search, they buy multiple times. So they end up being more valuable than those that buy through display.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to see it three-dimensionally. And you should obviously double down on what works and deprioritize what doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my opinion is that you should not stop something that works. You should deprioritize what doesn't work, and you should diversify when your primary channel is starting to giving you diminishing returns.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's more or less my view.
And George, you also spoke about, the framework to get in place, from your experience with market intelligence framework to reduce gaps of idea and profitable advertisement. Could you suggest some tools or hacks to get this framework in place for D2C businesses?
So you can analyze the market in two ways: top down and bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people that go to business school like to do the top down approach. You read reports, you estimate the market size, find the value drivers, maybe you even map the competitors in a positioning map. So you have the XY axis, and you will evaluate the categories primary drivers, say comfort, durability, and you will map them in a position in hopes of finding the white space, the market gap.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good approach, but it rarely survives reality. A brush with reality. On the flip side, smaller companies and most entrepreneurs prefer to do things bottom up. They run small scale experiments, they run surveys, lead ads, they ask people. They basically try to understand the buyers instead of the market. And that also works, but it gives you a narrow view because you don't see the forces moving around you. And it's far easier to be biased. Ultimately, both approaches have merit, but both become greater when combined. Right. Similarly, advertisers, in my view at least, are divided, or can be divided rather, in two broad buckets. You have people that make ads by instinct. So that's how most creatives act in advertising agencies. You have an insight or a brief, and you execute on it through instinct. And then on the other side, you have people that follow frameworks and systems. And this can be old school advertising wisdom, or it can be, behavioral studies or data. And again, both approaches have merit. Mm-hmm. Both become greater when combined. So the point I'm trying to make is that, like, the big secret is that you can merge all these approaches in one streamlined method using tools like social listening, applied behavioral science, right, database marketing principles, and like personality theory models even, like OCEAN, which stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Mm-hmm. So the end outcome, if you do that, is that you start seeing who the real customer is. Right. And your view of the customer is better because you have multiple points of view. And this ultimately means less risk, better outcomes, more efficient and faster outcomes.
Mm-hmm. Right. And when we spoke also about tools, do you recommend specifically within social listening, analytics, or even social media or performance marketing, any particular tools or platforms that you use where you kind of find it easy to get this kind of data as well as run ads more successfully?
One tool I like a lot is called SparkToro. And another tool I like a lot is, it's not social listening per se, but it's very useful, is Adbit.
Right. Okay, great. And George, digging in deeper into all these conversations of successful campaigns, tell me some interesting successful and even maybe failed stories within performance campaigns that you've heard of using Facebook, GDN, YouTube, or any other ad platforms.
So again, NDAs are a thing, but I'll tell you two examples which I think can be interesting. So for a specific product, out of the hundreds of image message combinations we tried, and I'm referring to display advertising now, the winning combination, which outperformed all others somehow, was a plain product image on a white background with a message similar to, hey, check this jacket. it wasn't a jacket, but it was something as simple as this, which goes to show that like no idea is necessarily a bad idea. Because sometimes, random, semi-random tests like this act as pattern interrupts, and they end up working in surprising ways.
Right.
So the second example, which to me is actually very big, and I talk about this anytime I get the chance to talk to smart people like you, because it's something I found through testing. I touched upon it earlier. It has to do with video advertising, and it's a little bit more general. As I said, if you study storytelling, filmmaking, advertising frameworks, you will see that they have like build up. What they recommend is that you build up things. There is a series of acts. Mm-hmm. There is a setup, and there is some conflict, and there is a payoff. But what we've discovered through testing is that like one of the most effective structures of performance videos is pretty much contrary to that common wisdom. Instead of having one narrative, you have a series of mini stories, mm-hmm. which are basically short, self-contained clips that rapidly switch from one to the other and are actually quite interchangeable, meaning you can reorder them freely and the video would still make sense. Mm-hmm. So it can be, to give a concrete example, it can be something as simple as from not using the product to now using the product. From being zoomed out and relaxed to zooming in and being intense. So like I'm talking about super simple mini clips. Right. And what this does is that it helps basically maximize the information that's being transferred. And because like it serves our dopamine addict brains, the novelty we need to keep watching essentially, is my hypothesis at least.
Right. Nice. Okay. Moving on to the last question of the segment. Give me 5 tips to successfully execute your e-commerce advertising campaign.
Yeah, as I said, start with the most attention grabbing frames. Pay off first, basically. No time for build up. Design for mobile. Design for the placement you will target is the correct approach, but it should mostly be mobile. So vertical content. Try to make it understandable even with sound off. Mm-hmm. So you can use, subtitles, graphics, or highlights to get the point across. It should make sense with sound off is the important bit, especially on Facebook and Instagram. When you do use audio, this is important for YouTube. It should enhance, not distract the point you're trying to make. Build different kinds of content for different levels of engagement. So if they get engaged but don't buy, you probably need more trust. If they buy but they don't buy again, you may need incentives, say discounts. Mm-hmm. And don't be afraid to test new things. Remember the hey, check this jacket story.
Right. Superb. Great. Well done, George. That brings us to the end of our first round. We are now getting into round number 2, which is my favorite round of questions. This is a rapid fire round of questions. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready. Sure.
All right, then. With a cookie-less future, how are digital marketing advertisements looking to track their audience behavior and connect with them more meaningfully?
I think that it's not going to be as bad as most people think, because I don't think we'll go for 100% private internet anytime soon. But a more private future means a bigger need for trust first or value first. So in essence, instead of buying attention, we will need to be more deserving of attention. Right. And I would welcome this change both as a consumer and as a marketer.
Well said. Teach me 3 important words when it comes to e-commerce marketing.
3 important words. Mm-hmm. Profit, margin, growth.
Okay. Choose one of the following. A brand ready to spend but not listen to its customer. A brand that's ready to listen to its customer but not spend. Or a brand that neither listens nor spends or does whatever they want. Which brand performs better?
Oh my God. Probably the first one, unfortunately.
A brand that is ready to spend but not listen to its customers?
I mean, if you throw enough money against the wall, something will stick, right?
Okay.
Unfortunate, but I mean, it's probably true.
Right, right. Courses, certifications, or experience that one needs to become a better e-commerce marketing specialist like you.
I like CXL's courses, CXL Institute. They have good courses. But people should really, in my opinion, step back from doing courses. And I'm saying that from experience because I've done tons of courses.
Mhm.
And they should focus on doing things and finding courses as they encounter problems in what they're doing. So don't start with study and then go to do things. Do things and study what you need to make progress.
Right. Super. Where do you go to read up the latest trends on e-commerce?
Yeah, that's a good question. I read publishments by big tech companies. So Facebook, Pinterest, all those companies have blogs which they
Mhm.
publish some fairly insightful research. I also, all the big sites, Shopify, a big commerce, all those big
Mhm.
sources. What I like to do also is I try to join, relevant conferences or
Mhm.
online conferences these days. Like AdWorld conference was one I liked a lot.
Mhm.
I went recently. And then I just have, I'm connected with a number of people that are involved into e-commerce. So I keep in touch with them and see what works and what doesn't.
Right. Right. Great. And what's the future or future trends of e-commerce marketing according to you?
I think we are going to shift towards monetization slash retention approach because the current model of growth at all costs is failing, basically, in my opinion.
Mhm.
And I think that in combination with trend towards privacy, it's probably going to be, which is a good thing. Like e-commerce stores will need to be less spammy and more interacting with the customers and building brands.
Mhm. Okay. Well done, George. That's a smooth round. And we are now heading into our last segment of the show. And this is a question from Rachita Parekh. And she sells jewelry and accessories online. Her question states that I have created an online store on WooCommerce for my brand. And while I've been running ads on Facebook and Instagram to generate inquiries on the DM or mail, it hasn't been really fruitful. If I need to revamp my strategy and now drive traffic to the website, apart from Facebook and Google, is Pinterest a good option that I should opt for? And secondly, how long will it take me to actually show results in form of revenues, regardless of which platform I start advertising on?
So let's unpack that. Let's take it from the beginning. The reason why the campaigns may not be working may have to do with the ads themselves, like meaning how they're set up, how who they're targeting, and what the creative is, and like basically if they're good or not good from the perspective of the customer. The second is whether the product is desirable, right? So if it has been validated through other channels, like if people really like those jewels, it's probably not an issue of the product. But if it's really new and it hasn't been validated, it should be validated first before you overinvest in advertising that you have the right products and people want those products. Regarding Pinterest, it can work fairly well. And the way to think about Pinterest is that it is like a search engine for inspiration. So if you have visual products, which I assume like jewelry would be very visual products, then it should be a very good place to promote your store. Regardless, I think you should experiment very heavily on different channels, whether that's Pinterest or whether that's partnering up with an influencer, a small influencer to promote your jewels. Like in A/B tests, you need to have about 1,000 conversions to even run A/B tests.
Mhm.
So it's not as easy. And then, as I said, double down on what works and deprioritize what doesn't. Don't be discouraged. It's not easy,
Mhm.
but it gets easier.
Right. Makes sense. Amazing stuff, George. That kind of brings us to the end of this episode. This has been really productive and valuable information on e commerce marketing. So, thank you so much for making time for the Deliberate Talks podcast. I hope you had fun on the show.
I did. I absolutely did. It was quite refreshing to have the rapid fire questions.
Great. Amazing. Thank you so much, George. And I wish you all the very best and your ventures and projects as well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
And that's the end of today's show and yet another week of learning that passes by. If you have any questions on e-commerce advertisement, you can write to me at deliberatedocs@gmail.com or connect with me on the social media channels and the audio platforms. Join in next Monday for another episode. Until then, please take care of yourself and don't forget to inspire and be inspired.